In the annals of naval superpowers, there exists a singular and formidable concept, the reserve fleet, often revered as the sleeping fleet. These are not mere relics abandoned in the silent graveyard of ships, but a spectral fleet, colossal steel giants lying dormant, meticulously preserved, awaiting the day they shall be reawakened when the nation faces its darkest hour. This is the saga of the United States Navy's sleeping fleet, an epic tale of strategic foresight, relentless adaptation, and unmatched industrial might. Technically, this concept has existed almost since the inception of the United States Navy. Yet the establishment of a systematic process, a true science of preservation, belongs to the modern era forged through nearly 2 centuries of costly mistakes and hard-earned lessons. Few realize that immediately following the War of Independence, there was a brief period when the United States Navy was all but non-existent. The Congress, embodying a mindset both typical and destined to recur after every war, resolved that a standing navy was unnecessary. The budget was slashed to nearly nothing. To the politicians it seemed tranquil. Seas demanded no costly warships. This was a lesson America would be forced to relearn time and again. But harsh reality swiftly shattered such hopes. Threats from pirates along North Africa's Barbary coast and an undeclared naval war against France in the Caribbean compelled Congress to commission a new fleet of powerful frigates whose names would soon be etched into legend. At that juncture, placing warships into a state of reserve readiness was far from a novel concept. Naval superpowers such as Britain and France had long mastered this art. The British procedure, especially concerning battleships and destroyers, was meticulous and rigorously systematic. First, the vessel is carefully guided into the dry dock. Every mast and gun is meticulously dismantled. The most conspicuous hatchways are shielded beneath modest canopies, while the gun ports are securely sealed. Inside, every supply from gunpowder to provisions was meticulously cleared away. Then the bare hull was towed to a secluded bay or secure harbor and moored. This procedure was known as placing a ship in ordinary, a state of preserved readiness at rest but not abandoned. A minimal crew was maintained aboard each vessel or distributed among several ships, entrusted with the straightforward yet vital duty of daily patrols, inspecting for leaks, identifying significant defects such as rot, executing necessary repairs, and occasionally bringing along dogs to hunt down rats. When war erupted, the ship would be hauled back into the dry dock, rearmed and resupplied with vital provisions. The most formidable and time-consuming task was often the complete reconstruction of the mast system. However, this process demanded an immense onshore infrastructure, towering cranes, dry docks, bustling piers, sailors' quarters, and vast armament depots. Britain, forged in the crucible of relentless warfare, possessed both the cause and the means to uphold this formidable system. Yet the United States Navy, smaller in scale and burdened by a budget so small, it was barely functional, embraced a more impromptu and perilous strategy. Rather than adhering to a rigid protocol, American vessels were often merely towed to a dock, stripped of a few perishable supplies, and then left to languish. Whether a ship could be revived for future service was left entirely to the whims of fortune. The outcome was a vast and unpredictable disparity. The legendary USS Constitution, after a prolonged period in reserve, remained in sufficiently sound condition to be reactivated with only minor repairs. Meanwhile, one of its sister ships, simultaneously withdrawn from the reserve fleet to confront the very same crisis, had decayed beyond repair, its condition so dire that dismantling was the only recourse to salvage whatever remnants remained. The fate of the battleships followed a similar course. USS Independence served for nearly a century, albeit mostly in a secondary role, while others decayed in storage or were deliberately burned at the Norfolk Navy Yard when the Civil War erupted. The American Civil War marked the next great expansion of the United States Navy. Yet as the conflict drew to a close, the Navy confronted a new dilemma, a wealthy man's headache, an immense fleet. Once again, Congress moved swiftly to slash the budget. Armored warships, despite their reinforced iron hulls, were not spared the fate of abandonment that had befallen the sailing vessels before them. the relentless attrition of random losses persisted unabated. Several Monitor-class warships found new homes among South American nations. The USS Kearsarge, renowned for its decisive victory over the Confederate raider CSS Alabama, cycled repeatedly through the reserve fleet. The USS Hartford, the illustrious flagship of Admiral Farragut, entered periods of reserve status from 1868 to 1872, and again from 1890 to 1899. Neglected in maintenance and preservation, she was subjected to an extensive and costly 5-year reconstruction at the close of the 19th century. Following this arduous restoration, Hartford served as a training vessel, only to be ultimately abandoned and left to decay throughout the 1950s. During this period, confronted with the stringent budgetary constraints imposed by Congress, the Navy was compelled to exercise extraordinary ingenuity. Among its most distinctive stratagems was the deployment of the Ship of Theseus's game with the lawmakers. The process was a clever deception. The Navy would ask Congress for funds to repair an old unfinished ship. In reality, they used the money to build an entirely new modern vessel, on the same slipway, using only a few token parts from the original, and most crucially, keeping the same name. It was a financial cat-and-mouse game, a real-life version of the philosophical puzzle known as the Ship of Theseus, and many believe it continues at the Pentagon to this day. As the 20th century dawned, the United States Navy surged forth with renewed vigor. Yet the conclusion of the First World War and the Washington Naval Treaty once again confronted them with the challenge of an oversized fleet. This time they were compelled to embrace the concept of a reserve fleet with earnest resolve, an idea formally instituted in 1912, featuring 2 reserve fleets assigned to the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In the 1920s, the reserve bases at Philadelphia and San Diego began to fill with long lines of World War I-era destroyers from the Wickes and Clemson classes. A new preservation protocol was introduced, yet it was largely disregarded. Instead, the vessels were coated with a thick layer of red lead primer, earning them the moniker, the Red Lead Fleet. Countless layers of thick grease were painstakingly applied to every mechanical component, a desperate bid to stave off the relentless assault of moisture. This particular lubricant bore a name that has since etched itself into legend and the nightmares of countless generations of servicemen: Cosmoline. It was an exceptionally effective anti-corrosion wax, yet notoriously stubborn to remove. For those who had to scrape it off an old rifle, it was a grueling and exhausting task. Now envision the monumental task of purging that substance from the entire engine system, the gun mounts, and every crevice of a destroyer. It stands as a testament to the colossal labor involved, a grimy, grueling endeavor, yet absolutely indispensable. As the storm clouds of the Second World War gathered over Europe, the Red Fleet was summoned once more to action. Yet it was at this pivotal moment that deep-seated challenges began to surface. The USS Greer, reactivated from this very fleet, became the first American warship to engage a German U-boat in combat during the autumn of 1941, months before the fateful attack on Pearl Harbor. When 50 destroyers were transferred to Britain under the Destroyers for Bases Agreement, the list of defects left behind was staggering: hull leaks, so severe they had pierced through entirely bulkheads corroded beyond watertight integrity, warped superstructures and electrical and plumbing systems ravaged by deadly corrosion. The lesson was unmistakably clear: half-hearted preservation policies had utterly failed. Remarkably, as early as 1943, the Navy had already embarked on plans to transition the fleet from wartime to peacetime operations. By May 1944, they had commenced procuring and stockpiling essential materials. At the twilight of the Second World War, the United States Navy commanded the most formidable naval force ever assembled in history. Nearly 24 fleet aircraft carriers, dozens of escort carriers, close to 24 battleships, almost 400 destroyers, nearly 250 submarines, and an innumerable array of other vessels. New reserve bases sprang up across the nation, from Bremerton and Philadelphia to Mare Island, Boston, Charleston, and beyond. The Navy's original blueprint envisioned maintaining 3 distinct fleets: a formidable active fleet, a ready reserve fleet, and a deep reserve fleet. However, this ambitious plan soon encountered two formidable obstacles. First, Congress swiftly slashed the budget, undermining the grand vision. Second, and equally critical, was the point-based discharge system, a policy where sailors who had served the longest and seen the most combat, the very experts who knew the ships inside and out, were the first to be sent home. This precipitated a formidable waterway traffic jam within the shipyards, sparking a profound manpower crisis. The Navy found itself bereft of skilled personnel capable of executing the meticulous preservation procedures required. Consequently, the ambitious three-tiered maintenance plan was abandoned. The active fleet was drastically reduced in scale. 12 of the Essex-class aircraft carriers and 9 of the 10 modern battleships were placed into mothball status, leaving only the USS Missouri steadfastly in commission. Confronted with this monumental challenge, the Navy pioneered a revolutionary preservation process meticulously addressing three critical issues: moisture, intricate equipment, and lubricants. This process unfolds as a symphony of engineering and chemistry. First, each vessel undergoes a meticulous overhaul. Machinery is cleansed thoroughly and coated with a thin, wax-based anti-corrosion film. This protective layer melts away, transforming into a lubricant as the engines roar back to life. Next, the vessel underwent a rigorous fumigation process to eradicate every trace of vermin. All hatchways and portholes were meticulously sealed shut. The ship's formidable armaments, including the mighty 16-inch guns, were encased within airtight plastic sheaths. Exposed equipment such as the 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns and the towering radar antennas were cloaked beneath hemispherical domes, transforming these warships into veritable colonies of snow huts. Yet the most ingenious invention lay in transforming the very ship itself into a sealed, moisture-controlled bubble. Industrial dehumidifiers were integrated seamlessly with the vessel's fire suppression system. Damp air was drawn in, passed through layers of silica gel desiccants, and dry air was then pumped back, circulating throughout the entire ship. A destroyer requires but a single dehumidifying unit. A cruiser demands 3, while a battleship or an aircraft carrier commands as many as 8. Within this framework, a destroyer's power consumption could be maintained at an annual electricity cost of merely $100, an astonishingly low figure even for the 1950s. But within these sealed steel hulls lies more than mere machinery. They are time capsules, frozen fragments of history, suspended in eternity. Decades later, as crews returned to reactivate or dismantling teams boarded the vessel, they uncovered relics from a bygone era. Aboard the USS Missouri, they discovered daily orders from 1955, still affixed to bulkheads, preserved with such clarity they appeared as if posted just yesterday. Aboard other vessels, one would uncover books, magazines, and even unsent love letters dating back to 1946. Each ship was far more than a mere weapon. It was a home harboring hopes, fears, and the unfinished stories of those who once served within its steel embrace. All the painstaking preparations culminated in a stunning vindication when the Korean War erupted unexpectedly in 1950. At that critical juncture, the United States Navy's presence in the Western Pacific was but a shadow of its former might, comprised solely of the aircraft carrier USS Valley Forge, the heavy cruiser USS Rochester, the light cruiser USS Juneau, and a mere dozen destroyers. While other warships, such as USS Philippine, Sea Boxer, and the battleship Missouri took weeks to arrive, the United States Navy unveiled its trump card, the Sleeping Fleet. When the crews arrived at the reserve bases, they were astonished to discover that reactivating the ships was far more straightforward than they had anticipated. The outcome was nothing short of astonishing. In a mere 9 months, 381 warships, surpassing the entire standing fleet of the United States Navy at that time, were reactivated, fully crewed and dispatched to the front lines. The remaining 3 Iowa-class battleships, alongside countless aircraft carriers, cruisers and destroyers, were roused from their long slumber to sail once more. The Korean War unequivocally demonstrated the indispensable value of a meticulously maintained reserve fleet. The procedures employed proved their effectiveness beyond doubt. Today, some of those colossal giants still endure astonishingly well preserved, after more than half a century standing as floating museums, silent witnesses to a strategic vision, a testament to perseverance and industrial might that helped shape the course of world history.